Good afternoon, this is Brandy. Who's joined us online?
Good afternoon, Brandy. This is Kashi Garrett.
Thank you, Regent Garrett. I'm going to mute in Fairbanks until we get started.
Do that. My earbuds can hear me. So, okay, my earbuds are in. Can you hear me?
Yes, Kashi, I can hear you.
All right, thank you.
Regent Hughes, I'm ready in Fairbanks whenever you're ready. You will need to unmute there in Anchorage to get started.
Brandy,
I can hear you.
Have you heard from Regent Bania yet?
I have not heard from Regent Bania or Regent Tuber.
Regent Tuber has just appeared.
The forces of good.
Oh, there
The
he
force
is.
of good is here. There he is. You can see him. Okay, and I know Regent Garrett's on the line, and I see Regent Perdue and Regent Anderson's on the line. So would it be possible for somebody from your office, he may not have been able to attend, but I didn't hear he wasn't going to attend, to contact Regent Bania, and we'll continue, but perhaps you could do that, have Janelle do it?
Yeah, I'll have to step out to ask her. Or Michelle, would you mind? Yeah, we'll have Janelle give him a call so we can get started.
Okay. Okay, and then we also have Regent Parker with us, as well as people all over. We have some UAA faculty and also administration with us. So do you want to, in effect, take a roll of who's here, or are you concerned about, for committees, just the regents?
For committee, it would just be the regents, and I'm happy to take a roll if you're ready for that.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you, Brandy.
If you prefer, we can have folks go around the table and introduce themselves if you prefer that as well, once I take roll. Up to you, Chair.
That would be great. That would be wonderful.
Great. So I'll go ahead and take the roll for the board. Regent Anderson?
Here.
Regent Bania? Regent Beretta? Regent Davies? Regent Garrett?
Present.
Regent Hargraves? Regent Hughes?
Yes.
Regent O'Neill? Regent Parker?
Yes.
Is she?
Regent Parker's here.
Okay, thank you. Regent Perdue?
Here.
Regent Tuber?
Here.
Your committee members are present. And would you like me to start in Fairbanks with the round table, or did you want to do it there, Chair?
You may start in Fairbanks.
Okay, this is Brandy Berg with the University of Alaska Board of Regents Office.
Michael Hostina, General Counsel for the University.
Matt Cooper, Associate General Counsel.
Myron Dosh, Chief Finance Officer.
Mark Kondrak, Chief Information Technology Officer.
Julie Queen, Interim Vice Chancellor, Administrative Services, UAF.
Michelle Rizek, Vice President, University Relations.
Paul Lair, Vice President for Academic Students and Research.
Anupma Prakash, Provost and Executive Vice Chancellor, UAF.
Dan White, Chancellor, UAF.
Larry Hensman, UAF, Vice Chancellor for Research.
Sina Anahita, President of the UAF Faculty Senate.
Carrie Santoro, Vice President of Staff Council, UAF.
Sue Mitchell, Geophysical Institute.
That concludes Fairbanks.
Thank you, Brandy. Chancellor, we will begin with you for introduction.
Kathy Singh, Chancellor, UAA.
John Stalvey, Interim Provost. Jeff Jesse, College of Health.
Megan Olson, University Advancement.
Christy Bell, Associate Vice Chancellor and Director of the Business Enterprise Institute. Brandy Callahan.
Thank you all very much. And prior to, I guess we'll adopt them. I'd like a motion to adopt the agenda.
Chair Hughes, how about Juno?
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Please, UAS.
Thank you, Regent Hughes. Rick Caulfield, Chancellor. No.
Ronaldo Cadanti Brown, Associate Vice Chancellor, Native Programs and TEDAS Director.
I'm Lauren Havoc, Associate Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences.
Elise Tomlinson, UAS Library Dean.
Lori Klein, Vice Chancellor, Enrollment Management and Student Affairs.
Karen Carey, Provost.
Michael Siri, Vice Chancellor for Administration.
Thank you all. You can tell that 3 screens are one too many, I guess, for me. Before we begin, could we have a motion for adopting the agenda?
So moved.
So moved.
Move.
Second. Purdue.
Thank you. Is there an objection to the agenda? Hearing
We
none?
need to do roll call.
Oh, that's right, you have to do roll call.
Okay, adopting the agenda, Regent Tuber,
Yes.
Regent Garrett,
Yes.
Regent Purdue,
Yes.
Regent Anderson,
Yes.
Regent Hughes,
Yes.
5 in favor, none opposed.
Thank you, Brandy. Prior to turning it over to the president, first of all, I would like to thank all who have members of the community, the academy, staff, administration, and students that have written the regents and given us ideas and their concerns and also their goals and objectives. And so we're very appreciative of that. I'm also wanting to thank, on behalf of the interim subcommittee, all the people who worked so hard last week under the direction of Vice President Lair. And Mr. President, it was very wonderful for us as regents to be able to observe many of those sessions. And I'm appreciative of you and the Vice President for doing it, and also for the various members of our university community for allowing us to observe, because it was really helpful, very, very helpful. And of course, I think I just got notes from those meetings sent to us, so the regents are all getting those. For today's meeting, since we are in various locations, some of which I guess I don't remember, but I'll try during the meeting to remember them. And also on the phone, what I'd like to do is, as the presentations progress, what we'll do is stop and then have comments or questions. We have 2 hours, and hopefully the presentations are so scheduled for that amount of time. And then at the end, I'd like to have 10 or 15 minutes for just comments, because this will be the last time and the only time the committee's together before our September meeting. So, Mr. President?
Well, thank you, Regent Hughes, and thanks for members of the subcommittee for coming today and reviewing the information that we posted, and in advance for your questions and your suggestions about how we're moving forward to follow your direction. The purpose of the meeting today is to, pursuant to your direction, to update you on the work that we've been doing and get your questions, your suggestions, in order to prepare more effectively for the full board discussion on September 12th. Brandy, could you go to slide 4, please?
Certainly.
Thank you.
There you go.
Thanks a lot. So this is just a reminder of your direction, the direction you gave us on July 30th. 4 major points. 1, reduce administrative costs immediately. So we'll talk about the work we've been doing there. 2 is to prepare a strategic approach to combining duplicative academic colleges and schools, research institutes, enhanced integration of our community campuses, and to bring that strategic approach to you on September 12th. So we'll describe the work, our progress on that. The third point is preparing a plan for a board of approval for transition to a single institutional accreditation. And then finally, to share with you the, I think, substantial extent to which this work is and will continue to be based on consultation with students, faculty, governance groups, and increasingly community leaders. If we move on to the next slide, I think it's important also, while not a specific motion of the board, the interests that we discussed at the board meeting are summarized here on this slide. It was, I think, a very fruitful discussion that morning on what we're after, and I think it provides us a lot of guidance here in the administration as to how we should proceed. What are the broad criteria that we need to use as we evaluate options and consider the course going forward? Certainly increasing the share of whatever budget we have on academics and student services and less on administration to maximize service for our students and to create as much as possible a seamless student experience. Again, the relentless focus on students, of course, the fiduciary responsibilities of the board, given our budget context, the values of the university and how important they are in guiding us through these challenging times, the integration of our several segments of our mission, particularly teaching and research, enhancing public service, and then really thinking about the importance of research in economic development in our state. So with that introduction, really, in setting the stage, I'm going to hand it to Michelle Rizek now, and Michelle can talk a little bit about the budget context, and then I will share with you the outline of our strategic approach, and then we'll dig into the administrative savings and work that we've been doing, the consolidation efforts there, and then we'll do a full court press on the academic progress that's being made. So Michelle, could you give us a summary of where we are budget-wise, please? So that'll be slide 6, and then again slide 7 and 8.
Sure. Michelle,
yes.
Prior to doing that, prior to that, whoever's on the phone, or I'm hearing noise, and if you could mute your lines. Thank you. Go ahead, Michelle. Sorry.
So this is the budget history slide that we always like to go back to. So I'd point out, starting in FY14, that was our high point for our UGF at $378 million, and then going down to looking forward to FY22, where we would be at $257 million, and that reflects year 3 of the compact that was signed with Governor Dunleavy. So over that time period from FY14 to FY22, it would be $121 million net reduction, or 32% in UGF, or the cumulative impact of nearly $500 million when you take the effect of not having those dollars each year and every year forward, starting back in FY15. So moving on to the next slide. This is the draft budget plan for FY20 to FY22. A $30 million budget reduction scenario was one that we had been working on for quite some time, and you'll see in here the plan that we've come up with here is a $34.1 million reduction for FY20. The first line in there reflects the state UGF reduction per the compact, with the $25 million in FY20, 25 in FY21, and then 20 in FY22 for the total of $70 million, which is a base reallocation. And then moving on to the investment areas, that total 9.1 million. There's 5 million in strategic initiatives. Recall over the last few years since President Johnson's been here, we've cut deeper to be able to invest in strategic priorities. Moving on, there'll be compensation adjustments, and that will be for the specific market adjustments and then also equity adjustments, and then Title IX and safety investments there. The compensation in the Title IX, each university will reallocate within their university to fund those costs. So I'll pause right there to see if there's any questions on the first half of this as far as the areas for investment.
Do any of the regents have any questions on this part?
Regent Hughes, this is Purdue.
Regent Purdue.
On the strategic initiatives, are these initiatives, I know in the past we've had enrollment initiatives and so on at the campuses. Is any of this directed towards helping our process go forward with working faculty across campuses and things?
Sure, and President Johnson, please jump in here too if you have other comments. We've been working on setting aside first a transition budget that's going to help for moving from the three to the single university, but specifically for the strategic initiatives, you'll recall the board's budget that they approved in November had some initiatives listed there, and then each university also has some initiatives. So after the September board meeting, we'll be meeting with the chancellors and going through what are the best investments to do with the $5 million in light of the direction that we get from the board at the September meeting. But yes, I would assume a lot of it will be directed towards collaboration and also enrollment and marketing. President Johnson, did you have anything to add there?
Well, thanks, Michelle. These investment strategic initiatives, and we shared these with the board, I don't recall exactly when, but this spring at each one of the levels, budget scenarios, these are directly tied to our goals. So they're economic development initiatives, they are research initiatives, enrollment-based or educational attainment initiatives, workforce development, and also initiatives in the cost effectiveness area. Now, a lot of those really emerged over a year ago when we began building this budget process. So one of the things we'll be working on with the chancellors is refining those specific initiatives. In terms of the transition, perhaps to your question more directly, Regent Purdue, we are setting aside funds, and we're looking at one-time funds, unrestricted fund balance to fund transition work over the next year to 2 years. So that will be an element that we bring to the board on the 12th, the specific amount of funds and then the allocation of those funds to specific activities that we'll be engaged in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Any other questions? Michelle, go ahead.
Regent Anderson.
Regent Anderson.
Oh, I'm sorry. President Johnson, are the one-time revenue pieces that you talked about, is that reflected in the faculty maintenance, or where is that on this page?
It's not, Regent Anderson, good question. These are all, we're really focused here on UGF, and so those transition funds would be for a specific purpose. They're not really to the base, and what we're talking about largely here is base funding.
Okay, and you'll have that number for us at the September 12th meeting?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir. We just thought for this purpose, it's not really to review the budget, but to provide some budget context for the conversation about structure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Michelle?
So moving into the expense reduction section, by area, you'll see where those reductions will take place in administration, academic programs and student services, research, and public service. Each of the chancellors received direction from the president on a budget target in each of those areas and to use as a guide. And so each of the chancellors submitted a plan to the president on Monday, and we're reviewing that, and that detailed information will be shared with the board at the September meeting. But the overall goal being here is to increase the share of resources devoted to academic and student services over the time period. I would point out specifically in here, and again, we used the guide from the $30 million plan that we had shared with the board at previous meetings as a starting point. But we do have in here, and we'll spend some time talking about this at the Facilities and Land Management Committee next week. As part of this plan, we would be reducing the amount of facility maintenance by $8 million. We're currently spending $40 million in this area, and so we reduce it by $8 million, but then have a capital appropriation of $5 million, so the net effect would be $3 million in the amount that we're spending on facility maintenance. But the intent would be, as we look to reduce our facility footprint and sell certain buildings, again, which we will have a discussion about at the upcoming Facilities and Land Management Committee meeting, that the amount of maintenance that we're putting towards facilities, the reduction in that amount will be minimized because we'll have less facilities that we're taking care of. So are there questions related to the expense reductions?
This is Mary, this is Karen.
Yes, Regent Perdue.
A couple of comments. One is, well, I don't think I've had a chance really publicly to thank President Johnson and our chair Davies for the changing of that red number at the top of the chart to 25 million. And the leadership that took working with our governor and our legislature. And so I want to thank you all for that effort. And it is certainly a lot more easy to get your mind around. Having said that, the expense reduction numbers are very big. 16 million in administrative and 14 million in academic programs and student services for this for the year that we're in today. 2 million for research, which is, when you add up the research reductions over time, it's more than 25%, probably 30% of our state support for research. So the cuts are significant. They are not as significant, but they are significant. And I guess what I'll be looking for, both from the chancellors and the president, is in the plan that we have, is how do we balance the time that people want? The people want time to plan. We're planners, you know, and we want time to plan, and we want time to talk and work things out. And how do we balance time with the need to hit these targets? And I think that's my biggest question. Not that we have to make tough choices, but how fast do we need to make them? So that's just a comment. It's not so much a question, but that's what I'll be looking for as we move along in the presentation today.
President Johnson, Michelle, are you?
Michelle's got one more.
Well, oh, Michelle, you're one more.
And I'm sorry, I couldn't hear for a minute if someone was saying something.
Go on with your slide.
Okay, sure. Brandy, can you move to the next slide, please? And this, one up, yeah. And this is just a graphical representation of the numbers that were presented in the previous slide, just showing the, you know, based on the board's motion there, reducing administrative costs immediately in certain areas. And so this is just showing as per the plan, the amount of reductions in administration versus academic programs, research, and public service. slide, Brandy. And President Johnson, I'll hand it back to you now.
Thank you, Michelle. So for those of you online, we're looking at slide 9 now, entitled Strategic Approach. And what you've got here is on the very top in red, the budget constraints that we have over the next 3 fiscal years, the current and 2021 and 2022. And then coming down and mapping that onto our academic term going forward over the next 3 years. And then arraying here the activities in terms of central administration, academic, and student services that we'll be going through to reduce costs and modify structure. And so you see here in the summer of 2019, our focus in administration is largely planning, although there's some implementation. Human resources got moving a little bit earlier, and so they are actually in implementation mode now and actually in operation mode. Those are the 3 basic phases that we're looking at for all of these administrative areas, actually 4 now that I think of it: planning, implementation, operation, and then evaluation and improvement going forward. And so in the financial areas, so that's procurement, accounts payable, et cetera, that is going on now, along with facilities, information technology, and a portion of advancement, particularly development. And then we're also looking at Title IX and some of our compliance investigation functions. So that planning work is happening this summer and fall in some of these cases, but in a number of them that we want to move out and begin implementation and begin the cost reduction soon. And that goes in a way to your point, I think, Regent Perdue, in terms of timing. Here we're trying to, as much as we can, front load the cost savings, cost reduction on the administrative side this year, giving us not a lot, but some time to do the needed planning on the academic side. And our intention, if this plan works out, that we would be starting to capture significant academic cost savings in year 2 and in year 3. A really important point I want to make here, too, is to the extent that we can reallocate academic cost reduction into academic initiatives, I think is really important priority for us. The last thing we want to do, in my view, is pull cost out of academics and be putting it into administration. And so I think that's a very important priority going forward. That said, in order to hit these numbers, we're going to have to reduce across the board. But as you see here, the timing of it front loads the administrative reductions, and then this year, moving into the academic, we're already working on the planning. Paul will talk in a moment about the planning work that's already begun, and I think a number of you are aware of some of that work, but we'll talk about that. And then the proposal that we will make to the board at the September meeting is that you direct us to conduct program reviews, and that we would conduct those expedited program reviews this fall and bring the results of those and the recommendations from those program reviews to you at the November meeting. As I think you know, but I think it merits highlighting, since the board appropriately, in my judgment, terminated the declaration of financial exigency in order to reduce academic programs or discontinue them, we must go through program reviews. And so now that declaration has been terminated, and again, in my view, appropriately, we need to move through the program review process. And we'll have that plan in more detail laid out for you at the September meeting, although we have some characteristics of the plan that we'll talk about in a few minutes. Then in the spring, on this academic stream of work, if once the board makes decisions in November, then we would continue the planning at the curriculum level, the student transition level, and the accreditation level, and then move that out into transition and implementation, ideally in operation in a new structure, whether that's a 1 accreditation structure or 3 or 2, whatever is determined by the board. We would be moving into that mode in the fall of 2021. Again, to your point, Regent Perdue, about timing, there are, of course, a number of people who support in general this direction, but who would prefer we take more time for planning. The tension there is that the more time taken for planning, the less time we have available to capture the cost reduction that is going to be necessary under this budget. I don't want to lose sight, too, of the flip side of this. We're focused here on cost reduction. I think there also are big opportunities for revenue here as well, not only through facility monetization or intellectual property commercialization, but I think there are some opportunities here for the development of new and interesting academic programs that can generate enrollment. And so we want to get about capturing savings and creating the revenues needed to invest so that we can grow programs that are more attractive to students, more online programs and more innovative programs that meet student and workforce development needs. I included academic administration here as a stream of work. There's nothing specific here, but I included it just to call it out, because when we typically think of administration, we think of it as people in central administrative organizations. Yes, there is central administration both in statewide and at the 3 universities and at our larger, especially community campuses. But there's also a lot of administration in our academic units, in the colleges, in the schools, across the university system. And so as we move forward in this process, we'll also want to be focused on that academic administration and integration of it with the academic structure and administration reforms. And of great importance, of course, is student services. And that team is working with the leadership of Saichi Oba, and there will be a few summary slides in this presentation on their work, and they will also be coming forward with a plan for the board's review on November 7th. And part of student services, or part of the student experience at the university, is athletics. And Matt Cooper is here, the Associate General Counsel. He's been working with the athletic directors on options for how we can maintain athletic programs, whether we have 3 accreditations or 1 accreditation. And so at the right time in this presentation, we can talk about that as well. And again, there'll be a more detailed report for you at the September meeting, and we would be teeing up a decision for you in sync with the decisions regarding academics at the November meeting. So there's a lot on this slide. There will be a lot more detail as we move forward with the presentation, but I think this provides you a general picture of how we're looking to phase in the work, the decisions, and then implementation of a more streamlined academic and administrative structure at the university. And I would emphasize, just put an exclamation point on the asterisk, and that is that the working groups that met last week, there were over 200 faculty, staff, and students involved. And as we move forward with the program review groups, we'll want to even step that up, particularly now that faculty are fully back and students are on campus. We'll have an opportunity to include more faculty and more student input as we go forward.
Any questions of President Johnson before he goes into a different topic? Is that? Mm-hmm. Any questions on the phone? Okay.
Regent Anderson.
Yes, Regent Anderson.
President Johnson, under academic administration, are there issues, are there plans that you have put in force, or without seeing any kind of implementation or a strategic approach on that? is it something that's in the works? What's the deal?
Regent Anderson, great question. It's something our eye is on, but it's not in our central vision at this point. Our focus really is on central administration, and then as we develop the academic structure, the academic administrative aspects of that will follow. So just to give you an example, we are already in a consolidated human resources environment. There are, however, lots and lots of people across the university system, over 100 probably, with some human resources responsibility. And those folks work in the College of Health. I see Dean Jesse here, so it's just an example, or in the College of Education, or in the School of Engineering. There are people with finance responsibilities and other administrative responsibilities distributed appropriately, but they're distributed in academic organizations across the university. So our eye is on them. We're aware of that work, but we think that the primary focus needs to be on the academic side, on that organizational structure, and then we can integrate the new consolidated administrative structure with a more integrated academic structure. Does that make sense to time it that way?
It does make sense. This is probably one of the biggest areas of cost reduction if we went to a single type of university. So I'm surprised that there's not more planning done for that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Regent Perdue.
Yes, sorry for keeping commenting, but this is good work. A couple things. One, I was able, and I know Paul will go over the plans from the groups. I was able to attend about 75% of the, observe about 75% of the events, either in person or online. And I have to say I was quite energized by some of the activity and the thinking that was being displayed. I don't want to minimize the challenge that people felt in the room, but I want to say that there was a lot of people stepping up. I was, for instance, impressed with engineering and the two deans and their leadership and the faculty leadership there. But I think their plan calls for more time, and around an accreditation cycle for our core curriculum than we have on our chart. And I got to thinking about this idea of rewarding people who are really ready to put their shoulder to the wheel, both budget-wise and with some time, to really make their work products something that they feel confident about. I guess that's why I asked that question earlier on, is if we have areas of improvement that are really ready to move forward from the faculty perspective, from the student perspective, then is there a way that we can somehow protect them from across the board cuts as they work through their plan? It's an investment approach. So that's a question I have. The second question or thought I have is, as you look at research, I understand research is a small dollar amount, but it leverages a lot of money. I'm familiar with Medicaid, which is the same kind of thing, 90-to-1, that kind of thing. If we are reducing in facilities, in academic overhead, we might be double counting some of these reductions. In addition, some of this money is for students, supporting students, postdocs and other students. So I would just ask that we look at that issue between now and September as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Okay.
Well, thank you very much, and there'll be much more work and refinement of this going forward. I'd like to ask Myron now to address slide 12. Here the focus is on administration, savings, and integration. Myron?
Thank you, President Johnson. I believe we're on slide 10 for the audience here with regard to administration, savings, and integration.
Thank you.
Yep. So this slide is really communicating two main things. One is sort of what our first 2 months of the fiscal year, how the freezes and the impact of the budget news impacted our expenditures. And then secondly, more detail with regard to anticipated savings from our, what I refer to as central administration, integration and consolidation. When we looked at the numbers for July and August and compared them to the prior year, we see that we're significantly down. You might say that that's good in some sense that we were able to react to that. About $8 million in savings for the first 2 months. So, for example, our travel was down $1 million, and our labor costs were down $1 million, and with the remainder kind of coming from our services and commodities lines. So some of that, was due to the freezes. Other parts of it, I think, was due to just kind of the shock of the larger numbers that we had at that period of time and some delay in encumbrance or entering into contracts. The second part of this communication, we talk about, implementation of HR, which is effectively in process now. So really from the change there are fewer positions with an estimated annual savings ongoing of $500,000 there. We are, in process with IT as well as with finance in varying stages with each of those. But we're estimating, between the two about, $4 million in savings there. And they come from a variety of directions or anticipate to some with, vacant positions or retirements. Some of it is from software reductions, video conferencing, our new travel system, bringing that online. There's lots of really good progress being made as I see, kind of going into the year. Electronic, payments, for example, moving away from as many check writings. That's another example will provide us savings. So we are going in stages there, in particular in finance, working on procurement now most immediately, and then we'll be moving to shift our focus more discreetly with travel and with accounts payable, moving into risk management as we move forward. So those are kind of the primary highlights here. And so this kind of ties back, I should mention, to the previous slides where we were showing, the integration work that we're doing, tying back to slide, I apologize, I don't have the number here. I believe it's slide 9 on the budget plan where we talk about integration and consolidation. And so this is, or integration and reduction, and this is a piece of that puzzle. Thank you. Any questions?
Do the regents have any questions of Myron? Thanks,
Mary?
Myron.
Mary, this is
Yeah.
Karen.
Regent Purdue.
Yes, thank you. So just to restate what I'm seeing here, you saved $8 million in the first 2 months from administrative putting on the brakes type activities. And I know that some of those things have been relaxed to some degree, but are we anticipating having like the September, like 29 degrees instead of 35 below kind of a freeze where we have some restrictions on travel, procurement, hiring, particularly administrative staff? What are our plans?
Thank you, Regent Purdue. First, I'd like to clarify that not all of this the slide is administration, but this 8 million is really all expenditures that are unrestricted expenditures. So I just want to clarify that that's not all administration. That's sort of just broadly across the UA system in terms of unrestricted expenditures. No, we are, I would say, process-wise with regard to the thaw, there is some exceptional approval still required by the president regarding hiring in particular. But with regard to travel and with regard to procurement, we did not institute any new, distinct process approvals for those two. So I would say it's just at this stage, it's a heightened sense of responsibility relative to our budget position to, unit managers and so forth to really be cognizant of our fiscal situation and the processes that we're going through now. And so we're working, I'm working with the vice chancellors in particular, in these consolidated areas that we, are mindful of the hires. So we're, communicating much more closely and so forth, that we don't, just for example, just hire folks, but mindful that we're in the process of these integrations. So hopefully that helps address your question.
Thank you.
Any other questions of the Regent's comments?
Regent Anderson.
Regent Anderson.
Myron, why are we in a thaw? You said that administrative oversight in a lot of these areas are being relaxed. I don't think this is the time to relax. I think it's the time to be tight.
Regent Anderson, I think we're in a thaw primarily, because one is when we have these freezes, there is an additional significant impact on those that need to approve, and so things move, can move very slowly, and there's a lot of bureaucracy when these things are put into place. It's not to say that prior to the freezes, the university doesn't have good approval processes. In fact, I think that we do have very good approval processes. So we are reverting back to that. I mean, I would just, I don't know, President Johnson, if you wanted to offer anything more on that, but that's kind of my view on it.
Well, thanks, Myron, and thank you, Regent Anderson, for the question. I think, we're less in an emergency mode. Yes, we do have a sense of urgency around cost reduction, but we also need to get work done. And one of the big ways we reduced costs initially this year was not filling positions. And when we don't fill positions, that burden goes on to others who are, in many cases already, are wearing 2 or 3 hats in light of the $51 million base reduction we've taken and 1,200 fewer employees over the last 4 years. And I also rely on the judgment of our chancellors and their university leaders to, approve this hire or that travel or that expenditure. I think there's also increased collaboration in terms of various licenses and things like that, so that instead of paying for 3, we can combine and pay for 1. So I think that's going forward. And then, as Myron indicated, all executive and senior administrator positions require my approval before they even go out for a search. And that is all, is Kelly on the line? Maybe Michelle knows, but that's over 100 positions. And those are, of course, the most highly paid positions across the university. So there's a high level of scrutiny applied to those positions and making long-term commitments to those hires.
Regent Anderson, do you have any follow-up?
No comment. No, that's fine, thanks.
Any other regents?
I would, Mary, this is Karen, I would just say that I would like the chancellors to think about it as that it's still below freezing. It may not be 65 below, but it's not, we're not thawed. We're definitely in minus, well, my favorite temperature, which is like minus 15. And we're definitely not above freezing.
Thank you, Rita.
That's well said. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to slide 11 now. And Paul, can you please lead us in the presentation and discussion of the academic strategy work? Thank you.
Great. Thank you, President Johnson. So what I wanted to do today is I've got several slides here. First, to talk about the broader academic strategy, say a few words about the planning workshops that we had last week, and then and a few words about the survey that is out there now, and then move on to some issues with students and the work that we're doing on student services and student affairs. So to talk about the broader strategy, it's been an interesting conversation in a climate of a changing foundation with regard to what our budget outlook looked like. And so when we started the process, we were actually moving on a much faster timeline in terms of some of the planning, and we've been able to step back a little bit in terms of providing more time for discussion, but also time for action as we go forward with this. And so where we are now in this phase one in July and August is starting to get input about various ideas. And if you see on the right-hand side, it is what we're looking at are how do we implement, obviously, the board's direction, but asking that question, if there were one college or program or of X in the state, how would we best organize that? And what are the pros and cons that we might see with that? How do we increase our student-faculty ratio and reduce program costs? And you can see the rest there that we are using as a basis for those discussions. So we were starting to get some input, and again, the stakeholder survey is part of that, and having a discussion about how we might evaluate programs. And so where we will be going to in phase two is looking at certain areas. And so on that list in the center of the page are several academic areas, starting with engineering, going down to career and technical education programs, as well as some organizational areas across the system. That is to say, community campuses, e-learning, organized research, public service, libraries, athletics, and others that we will identify as support areas and things that we can look at across the system as ways of better coordinating those activities. And some of those were the subject of the workshops that we did, and others are being organized now. Following the board meeting, we will be moving forward and looking at especially the academic programs, but also some of these other functions through various kinds of program or unit reviews, and coming back in November with more specific planning for how we might consolidate or coordinate programs across the system. Again, in December and through June, we'd be implementing some of those things, starting to look at student transitions and also addressing accreditation. I meet weekly now with Mac Powell from NWCCU to give him an update on our progress, and I am pulling together a team across the system to look at issues associated with a transition from 3 accredited institutions to 1 accredited institution, and so we will be ramping that up as well. One of the things that, addressing Regent Anderson's question about academic administration consolidation, the broader structures of many of our schools and colleges will be part of the program review process. And so although we will look at administrative functions that are done within departments, schools, and colleges, we'll also be looking at that broader structure for how do we, if there was one school of X, what would that administrative structure look like? And how would we meet the needs of student, faculty, and staff across the system with a distributed school or college, for example. And so that will be part of the function that we'll be looking at with regard to academic strategy. So that's our broad plan at this point in time. Again, for the board meeting in 2 weeks, we'll come back with some more detailed ideas of what a program review process will look like. And also then we will identify other programs we might want to look at during this first phase of this process for consolidation or coordination. So President Johnson, that's what I have for this slide at this point in time, and I can answer questions on this one.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Maybe I would toss in a couple of points here. One refers to the double asterisk there under charge for reviews, focus on excellent student experience. The asterisk refers the reader to the appendix of this presentation, two really important slides from our last meeting that characterize what that looks like. And of course, as we go forward here and include more student input this fall, we'll be fleshing out what that ideal student experience looks like. And another point I'd like to call out, and it was made numerous times in the workshops last week, and that is the critical importance of a local perspective. This isn't about centralization of everything in one location. This is about optimizing how we organize ourselves to deliver and serve people, not only in the big cities, but in communities all across the state. So not only getting local perspectives during the planning process, but ensuring that how we're built, how we're structured in the future strikes the appropriate balance between consolidation and integration, if you will, on the one hand, and at the same time, that local nimbleness and agility to serve local needs.
Thank you. I would also like to use this time, it's as good a time as any, I think, to ask Matt to say a few words about athletics and just to see where we are with regard to looking at our athletics across the system.
All right. Thank you, Vice President Laird. This is Matt Cooper here, Associate General Counsel. As noted earlier by President Johnson, I was tasked along with Keith Champagne and Greg Myford to start looking at options for athletics going forward under several different circumstances. So as you're all aware, the first decision that came out of this group was President Johnson's decision to go forward with the full athletic schedule for this academic year. And the second important milestone is coming up with a list of options and then to present those to the board at its September meeting, and then develop a recommendation moving forward at the board's November meeting due to the fact that we felt that we needed to be able to tell student athletes and our conferences by November of this year what the future of athletics looked like for the university going forward. So we'll be continuing to develop those and present those to you at both the September and November board meetings. We have had good conversations with both GNAC and NCAA about the options that are available to us under both a 3 accredited university structure and a single accredited university structure. So by September, when we discuss those options with you, we'll have a pretty good sense of how the conferences feel about the options that are available. And then after that September meeting, we will develop our preferred options and recommendations to present to you in November.
Thank you, Matt.
And I think if I could hop in, the goal of this work is to try our best to maintain, preserve some athletic programs where we currently have them. They may look a little bit different, but that's the idea. We see the value of athletics as part of the student experience and an important part of the relationship that our universities have with our communities. And there are some options since the last time we addressed this during strategic pathways that have been approved by the NCAA that we're exploring and talking with those schools as well. So some good progress being made on that front. Thank you.
Do the regents have any questions?
Okay. Next slide, Brandy. So, yeah, there we go. Okay, I'd like to now just highlight something we've already talked about, which were the planning workshops that were conducted last week. Kind of as a way of background, when we were following the July meeting, when it looked like we had to make some very rapid changes, I was trying to pull together a group to really do some of leaders perhaps and some others to do some strategizing. However, those meetings quickly grew into more an ability to bring people together to discuss what we might look like as a one UA or in consolidated programs. And I'd like to thank the faculty leadership and the staff leadership for providing participants for those workshops. I think that went very well, as well as it being representatives of administration from across the system. We had, as you can see, those workshops all last week, facilitated by Dr. Kutcher-Gershenfeld, and that was really very helpful for him to come in and use his change management model to address some of the issues out there. I also want to thank the board, members of the board for participating, especially Regent Perdue, who sat through quite a number of these discussions when we were in Fairbanks, and I do appreciate you and Regent Hughes and others. Regent Anderson, I know, was online for many of these as well. And so I do thank you for your participation in those. And Regent Parker was, and Regent Garrett was on as well. So Brandy's just told me who else was on those. Thank you all very much for your help. And you can see that the process was not to say what's the university looks like, but it was really to move through in an era of change. How do we address some of the issues that are out there and explore some of the options? And I think that Dr. Kutcher-Gershenfeld did a very good job. We had 2 sessions for each of these 8 areas that we focused on. We were able to have over 210 participants in these areas participate in person in either Fairbanks or Anchorage when we met in each location, or via Zoom or via phone. And there was active chats going on and lots of ideas generated through these discussions. And I do really appreciate everybody who participated. The meetings were live streamed as well and were recorded. And so if you go to the new UA website, the minutes from every one of those meetings is posted, and the video from each one of those meetings is also available for you to view. And the participant list is also there. So the idea that this is the discussions, which were very honest and straightforward and brought up some of the major possibilities, but also some of the major barriers that people are seeing as we're moving to maybe a one UA, were definitely brought to light. And I do appreciate everybody who participated in that. Now, in that meeting, we were emphasizing to people that this was only one part of the process. We want input from others as well, and so I'll be reaching out to student groups, staff, faculty, and other stakeholders to also provide input. But I think that the documents that these workshops produce is a good starting point to address some of the options and issues that are out there. One of the aspects, and so that's kind of just the structure. And on the next page talks about some of the observations that Dr. Kutcher-Gershenfeld and I saw as sort of a kind of overarching principles that came out in every one of those sessions. And so these are a list of things that almost every group brought up. Again, it's this concept of serving the students, and that was very obvious in all of the hopes, in all of the best case scenario kind of practices, is how do we serve our students where they are, when they are, and what that they need. And a lot of it is reflected in there in terms of these kinds of communications. So the facilitator has prepared a more a broader summary of his observations, and the president and I are going through that right now, and we'll share that with the board in the next few days, or definitely by the September meeting. But just some observations from him, and we'll be posting some of those observations on the website as well. But I think it gives us a very good starting point to have conversations about some of these different areas. What was obvious is that some groups, the areas, especially in the professional schools, are farther along in a coordination and collaboration aspect in terms of a one college of health or one college of engineering, but there are differences that are there as well. When we look at the bigger areas, such as the sciences, arts, humanities, social sciences. We didn't talk much about structure, but we talked more about the process to arrive at some decisions. And so there's a document that the group presented as a consensus document, which talked about a timeline and a process for the glide path. And so that's another document for discussion as well. So again, I think it's a beginning of a conversation. It came together very quickly, but I think that the results were exceeded my expectations. And talking with Regent Perdue, not to put words in your mouth, but I think it exceeded your expectations and what we had hoped to hear at that meeting. So that's all I need to say about that one at this point in time, but I can answer questions about the workshops if there are any.
Regents, do we have any questions?
Anderson has a comment.
Regent Anderson?
Yeah. I very, very much appreciated these sessions that were last week. I had a little over 30 hours of listening, and I enjoyed very much to see the process that the moderator put through. So he was facilitating the meeting, bringing out hopes and fears, and then transitioned into, if we saw University of Alaska in 2025, what would we see? And I was impressed with even some of the naysayers of what we're doing. We're there with great comments and ideas to re-envision this university. So I believe the outcome of these meetings will be very important for us to look at, to hear, and to take into consideration some of the great ideas that were brought forth. So I thought the sessions were handled very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Anderson.
If I may, Regent Hughes, one area that is not on this slide but is among those areas we'll be looking at this fall is reflected by a group of our Alaska Native academic leaders across the system sort of jumped the gun a little bit and got going ahead of time. And they did some work under the assumption that the cut was still going to be very, very severe. They got together, I believe it was here in Anchorage. I think, Maria, were you part of that? Okay. Well, I let them do their thing.
Yeah, so there's actually an emergency Alaska Native Studies Council.
I see. Yes. Okay.
We asked them to facilitate because it caught a lot of our faculty off guard that a very small number were putting forth a model that they never shared or put forward. I know it was a short time frame and they were concerned about this original budget cut, so there's definitely reasons for that.
Yes. So thank you. But in any case, it will be included going forward, and I think that's a positive. So I just wanted to note that.
And I would say, President Johnson, that other groups are self-organizing as well. And I have heard from the libraries, and I'll have a meeting with the librarians on Friday to start looking at some of the pros and cons of libraries in a larger university system. And there are definitely some cons in libraries in terms of costs for subscriptions when you're a larger university versus a small one. But we want to look at sort of what that means to coordinate those. But those groups have also, there's been some self-organization in some of the other areas, and communication has continued this week outside of the focus groups that we've had. And so I've heard from folks with e-learning, I've heard from schools of management and business and other units continuing the conversations. Okay, I'd like to move on to slide 14. So this is a stakeholder mapping survey. I think we've talked to you about this at previous meetings. The update for today is that we have received over 3,700 complete responses, and this is the final week of data collection, and we will be preparing the results of the survey for presentation at the September 12th meeting. Again, we've seen a broad, looking at some of the demographic numbers, we've seen broad participation from a number of groups. I mean, there are statistically significant participation from almost all of these stakeholder groups in terms of being able to see where their responses are. So the response has been overwhelming. We are asking those questions about how the university serves those stakeholders, but also how do they see higher education and the university's role in the state. So we are looking forward to those results. If you haven't done your survey, there's still time to go in as one of many stakeholders and to participate. Michelle, do you have any follow-up on that?
No, I think that's good.
Okay.
Highlights.
Yeah, I think it's a very exciting process. Again, Dr. Kutcher-Gershenfeld is the one that will be doing the analysis of the data, and we'll be presenting the results of those. And as you recall, they are importance and difficulty are kind of the big themes in those questions. How important is something to you? How difficult do you think it would be to achieve that goal? And so I think it's a very good analysis to be able to assess where we need to be putting our efforts in the future.
Do the regents have any questions on the poll that is out? I have a comment, Dr. Lair, with respect to the participants in that poll. Are you free to give the regents and the public who participated in it? Because I'm really wanting to have the leaders of commerce and industry be people that would participate in it because they're the employers of our students and have been the employers of our students. And so I'm sure there were ways taken to encourage them to do that. But in addition to, of course, all of our stakeholder groups, I mean, Alaskans throughout Alaska, I hope will be participating because each one of our locations has a fabulous constituency of people that are not only students, but people who utilize, Alaskans who utilize the university and care very much that it's within their community. So I don't know if we can do anything to make it more accessible, but that's what I certainly would like to see.
I don't think we can identify individuals, but they do self-identify in terms of their role in the community. And so, we're definitely seeing leaders of for-profit and non-profit corporations participating in the survey, but I don't know if we have the more specific than that.
Yeah, and Regent Hughes, this is Michelle Rizek, and I think that Robbie is there, and she's been working really hard on making sure this survey gets out to all the different constituent groups. So she may have some suggestions on how to make sure that we're hitting the group that you're mentioning.
Regent Hughes, we have been pushing the link out through various organizations and out through AE. It's newspaper articles and any number of other sources. The results are coming in. I think there's just about 4,000 responses and a fair number of industry community participants.
I thought the poll was well done, the way in which it was phrased, and I have ideas for my own goals, how I can get what I need to learn. So it was well done, and I hope that we will. Robbie, would you expect that in a population such as ours, what would you expect an overwhelmingly good number to be?
I think the survey drafter, Joel Gershenfeld, had hoped to have something somewhere in excess of 3,000, somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 responses was going to be stupendous from his perspective. So we're very close to that.
Sounds like it. Thank you. Any other regent comment or questions? We have a half an hour before the witching hour that you might get another 5 minutes, Mr. President. What's next?
Student,
okay.
Paul.
So I will be Sorry?
Hello, Regent Garrett?
Hello, thank you. Just to respond to your comment, Chancellor, about the stakeholder survey, would it be a good idea to extend the August 30 deadline by a week so that we can get it distributed to more people that request to fill it out? If we only have 3,700, it seems like not a whole lot compared to the actual stakeholders.
Thank you, Regent Garrett. We'll let the poll people decide about that. Paul?
Okay, so I'd like to go to slide 15. Slides 15, 16, and 17 were prepared by Vice President Oba along with Vice Chancellors Klein, Champagne, and Schultz, and I thank them for their work on this. These are 3 slides from a slightly longer presentation, which is posted on the new UA website under the Student Services banner, and I encourage you to take a look at that. But generally and very briefly, what the 3 slides illustrate is, again, what most groups started with what are our principles, what are our values as we think about student services as a holistic across the system approach. And again, this concept of accessibility but scalability are 2 big features there, to have both an overview central services, but also meeting the needs for students where they are. So that's really kind of what was looking at that, and then identifying what enrollment services, which is a part of student services and student affairs, is looking at is what should we be looking at in terms of understanding our student population. So the first slide really just kind of lays out those general principles. The second slide, the one with the graphic on it, is a way of thinking about the students at a more holistic standpoint, that it's not just an office dealing with a student for a particular purpose, but rather it's part of a larger continuum when we start to think about students. And so this is the way that we think about them. And we have to understand that our students come to our university from different perspectives. And so they want to be an engineer, or they want to study close to home, or they want a different mode of delivery, or they want all of the above. And so as we design our structure, we are going to keep those markets and those student needs in mind as we think about where our programs are, how do we use technology, how do we handle some of those requirements that our students have, whether they're on campus or in our community. They have mental health needs, they have financial needs, they have other kinds of needs, and we want to design a system that works for them. And then the third slide is really very briefly just the beginning of some conversations, and this is from the student services side, thinking about what we could do in the short term to centralize some functions that we do separately, and what needs to be at a particular campus, whether that's a larger campus or a community campus, what sort of support for students need to be more localized or regionalized. And so as we look at student services, the short term, we're going to start looking at things like applications for admissions and some of the verifications in terms of transcript checking and things like that. Are there things that we can do more centrally and as a shared services, or are there things that need to be done at an individual program or campus? And so they and their staffs have been thinking about this from a function standpoint, using the talents and the people that we have across our system to meet the student needs. And so I thank them very much for their efforts. It's definitely an ongoing process, and we'll talk a little bit more about it at the September meeting. But I just want to give you a flavor of the kinds of discussions that have been going on from a student services perspective.
Any questions of the regents about those 2 or 3 slides? Comments? Ms. Preston?
Thank you, Regent Hughes. On to slide 18, looking forward to the September 12th meeting. This is a draft, emphasis on draft, a full board of regents motion directing administration to conduct expedited program reviews. This is a tentative list of the areas that we would be asking for that direction in, and also we would be ready to share with you more details on the process that we would be going through for these expedited reviews. Because these reviews would be taking place across institutional boundaries, if you will, we have to come up with a process that enables that level of analysis. Our current general standard program review process assumes that it takes place at a university. And we have the ability, however, under your policy, to construct expedited and customized processes for reviews. So we'll do that and make sure it complies with board policy. So again, just a draft at this point. If you have additional comments now, fine. We'd love to hear those. Or if between now and September 5th, when we post materials for the September 12th meeting, if you have any additional input, we'd be happy to incorporate that.
Regents have any comments or questions?
Regent Hughes, Karen?
Regent Purdue.
I'm glad to see a couple things on this. One, breaking up of the very large fields of science, arts, and humanities into more discrete activities. One of the things I want to restate is I think if we are going to turn to our very smart people to work on these areas, we need to incent them. And under this environment, I know that's challenging. But I don't want people to feel that they're being singled out for both cost reduction and, the total changing of their world. And then we have other parts of our university system that are not undergoing that kind of scrutiny, I guess is what I want to say. I heard that at the workshops to some degree. The reason for doing these things are to serve students better, and then in regard to that, hopefully it will reduce costs. So I think the other thing that we heard that I want to put on the agenda, and I don't know quite how, is we have a lot of really good interdisciplinary work going on, degree-wise, that doesn't necessarily fit into some of these, cleanly into these areas. And how we manage and preserve some of that, because I think students are enjoying that work, is something that we have ahead of us. Thank you.
Any other regent comment? I have a question.
This is Cache. I have a comment. Hi, my earbuds fell out. Yes, just following up on Regent Purdue's comment on the interdisciplinary, I think that is a real gem at our institutions, and I'd love to see that preserved.
I'm sorry, Regent Garrett. Brandy, were you
I took my
able
earbuds
to
off,
hear
so I
what
went easier. If I may go again, I was just commenting. The interdisciplinary is beautiful. Let's hang on to it. And I need to sign off and attend the first day of my new graduate seminar on perspectives of the North.
Thank you, Regent Garrett.
Thank you, Regent Hughes. Goodbye, everybody.
I think that as we're going through this, and we're in a less extreme circumstance than we were, and so we can follow guidelines that are already in place. It can be used to implement some of the things that must be done. how is it that the funds that we are getting, how is it that that money is being deployed so as to, in effect, assist and frame what we're doing going forward?
That's a very good question, and I think one of the things we've been working on with the chancellors and with the statewide team is perhaps the flip side of that coin, which is more how do we take these reductions in a way that doesn't constrain the region's options structurally going forward.
Well, that's my question.
Yeah, and so
stated much better.
Well,
than I say.
that is a challenge, and so that's why we have been going back and forth with the chancellors on how they would look at doing things. Now we have, particularly in the administrative areas, we have said we're going to do these consolidations, and the savings will come through this consolidation work. It will be attributed to your reduction at your university, but it's going to be part of a larger system-wide strategy. Also, in the academic areas, the chancellors have identified opportunities for cost reduction that don't involve structural change. So leaving positions vacant, reduction of term appointments, reduction of adjunct appointments, things of that sort. Have been going on, and in fact, the chancellors have already begun those. They started in the spring, doing a number of those things. But we pretty much completed all of our. Okay, so a lot of that has gone on, but again, that work didn't involve structural stuff. So we're holding that out using this process, or the processes described here for those structural changes, and then making the reductions. Both administratively and academically, to meet the budget this year in the way I just described. For reductions next year and the year after that, those would be much more pursuant to the planning work that's being done here.
I think I shouldn't say I think, the way in which our monies are few dollars are being spent, particularly from the state. I think that has to be done very, very judiciously, and also with a sense of where we're going to be in the future. In other words, something like, for instance, if a faculty member, say in a small department, were as a result of across-the-board budget cuts, if one faculty member in say an 8-person department was eliminated, that could have, depending on our enrollment and what the students want, that could have devastating effects to what we would want to do in the future if there wasn't some thought put into it. And I guess from the Regent's standpoint, I think that we're in the situation we are in, and we have more time than we would have had, and at least for 3 years, we certainly have more dollars from the state than we would have had, and of course, not having to take as large a cut in 1 year. So in effect, the glide path is it's not optimal, and it's very speedy. But I think we really do have to be extremely careful. And I guess another question I have is that when we're looking at like our students now, we're just looking at those enrolled now, of course, and we probably won't even know in September who's where. But we've been experiencing less students over the years, and we know where we have the students, and we know how many students we have in those areas. And so the whole concept of the faculty-student ratio in some areas is is a lot more, it's a lot simpler, but nothing is simple, than in other areas where you get into interdisciplinary or where, I don't know, some type of sports or activity credits are utilized in another degree area, whatever the circumstances. I mean, because the degrees are made up of all sorts of different things, and some of them humanities and arts and so forth. So I guess I think things, caution isn't the right word, but I think great astuteness is needed in understanding how we get to be where we all think we can be, and allowing the communities to allow the communities to keep a university which will serve their communities as well as the rest of the state, but also have a flavor of that community in the university. And I think it really goes to more of the softer things about a curriculum, but I think those things are important.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Yeah, just a couple things. Accreditation, of course, here is foundational. It's fundamental. It's necessary. It's imperative. And key elements of the accreditation process as we go forward are, one, inclusion of voices that you're talking about, and faculty and staff and students, and also transparency of all of this work going on. And to that end, a number of things. One is the creation of a web page for all of this work. That's been noted several times in this meeting, where all the information, all the documents, feedback forms, survey results, etc., are available. And so that link has been made available to people, and we'll continually remind people of that so they have access to that. I will be continuing to send out messages to the university community every Monday. I've done it for quite a while now, and we'll continue that. We're standing up a Facebook page and other social media venues for communication. Also, op-eds and that sort of more traditional communication. One of those was published today in the ADN and in the News Miner and Frontiersman and the Peninsula Clarion. So getting that word out. We'll be scheduling town halls across the state in the October timeframe, and I'll be doing speaking engagements across the state as well, meeting with editorial boards, the standard ways in which we communicate both outwardly and get feedback in during this key time between a decision from you in September to move forward with these program reviews, and then are coming back to you in November with the results of those reviews, again, including community input, and then at that point asking you for direction going forward. So, thank you very much.
Any Regent comments?
As usual, I have one.
Regent Anderson.
This is Regent Anderson. My biggest concern that I see through this presentation today and the result of the workshops this past week is we've been given a luxury of a 3-year glide path, but we cannot, I just double underline not, put aside moving quickly, decisively toward the goal that we want to reach, and that's a strong university, in 2025. The other thing is don't forget that this is not a $25 million cut. This is a $70 million cut. And for years and years and years, we've asked the legislature to come up with a fiscal plan that gets us through boom and bust years. And this is our opportunity to make the best of this glide path process. But we just, I think you've heard me say this before, but we just can't afford the university of yesterday. And I think any institution that believes it can continue to operate using methods of today in this dynamic future risks extinction or certainly mediocrity or increasing irrelevance. I don't think, we talked about freeze and thaw. I think you said it very well to say that it's still 10 below zero. So I just encourage administration to not let time slide, because that's what academia does. So thank you.
Thank you, Regent Anderson. Regent Perdue?
How did you know I had something to say?
You were channeling me.
I wanted to just address a couple things. One of the other questions that's out there about enrollment, consolidated enrollment, accreditation, I'm sorry. Beyond the issue of our own accreditation is specialty accreditation and how that actually works with overall accreditation. It's very important. And in our processes going forward, we really need to give our groups the resources to understand. We need to have a list ourselves as regents about how many of those are there and how important those timeframes are. The other one is enrollment criteria. I've been reading some material that states that we would have to have the same enrollment criteria across our entire system, and that we don't have that today. So that would be an important area to address, because it would be important for regents to understand that as we were admitting and recruiting students. I would also, and there are many, many other questions that I have that I know we will be addressing, and as people are raising them, I am certainly reading about them. One of the things we heard very strongly in the workshops was people wanted their local flavor. They wanted their branding, and they wanted not only their athletic teams, but their regional identities. And I think that is important, and I appreciate you mentioning that, President Johnson, that our attention will be focused on that as we move forward to try to become more efficient. The only thing I wanted to also, I wanted to remind us all that as Regent Anderson says, we are not out of the woods. The eyes of the state are upon us. And we can self-determine our own destiny by streamlining our cost structures and our complexity. And that's where we are at this fork in the road. And I would remind us that the legislature as a body, the entire legislature, passed language that told us to study a different model of restructuring our university and to report to them by December. So that's not very long away. And some people say, well, those are optional obligations on our part, but I think in this environment, we need to take that responsibility very seriously. And I wanted to just spend a minute about some of the models that we've been addressing. We haven't talked very much about that today, but this idea of the consortium model, and I say this with the greatest respect, but I believe that the consortium model is a term that describes basically our current system. It's a code word for what we have now, the status quo, with perhaps some improvements. And over the decade that I worked with the university, and the time since, I've seen some really excellent coordination across the campuses, but I've also seen the other. And I hope that we please don't pretend that this issue of how difficult it is to work across our system does not exist, and by nature, we understand we need to correct it. We have good people trapped in a very competitive system right now for limited resources. And having said that, the reason I bring that up is because when we did receive a presentation from our chancellors on the consolidated, the consortium model, one of the subjects that was brought up was the College of Education or the School of Education. And I think that the intention of that was to discuss a crisis and how it was handled. But I think the conversation needs to be picked back up because I think it is an important lesson of learning how we manage something across a consolidated consortium model. And I think it's been difficult. I think the faculty feel it's difficult. And I think we need to have some lessons learned. I think UAS and UAF probably worked as hard as they possibly could to help those students. But has this been a failure? We kind of heard that. Or has this been something that we can build on? And because the ASA committee, the Academic and Student Affairs Committee, already has this on the agenda for September, I really want to hear from our chancellors, particularly UAS and UAF, on how they feel it's been going, because this is a lesson for us as we move forward. And I think that's how it's being discussed, negatively. But I think there's probably some positive things we can learn, and I think there's some things we need to be doing to continue to address the concerns that the faculty are bringing up to us in the workshops and in other venues. So I think I've probably gone on a little bit longer than I thought, but I think that the best way to see if the consortium model works is to make it work now and to use it in the venues that the president has suggested, both in the administrative and the academic areas. You know, can we be on the same page for students? And I will say that I'm interested in exploring a hybrid model potentially, which would include some of the wonderful things that we have in our system today and a more coordinated, streamlined accreditation model. I don't know what that looks like right now, but I don't believe that we should be simplifying our discussion to what we have today versus another model. I think there is a lot of value in having a discussion and coming together on something that really fits our needs. So that's probably more than you asked for, Regent Hughes, but that's where I am right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Perdue. Any other Regent comment? Regent Tuber? No.
What would you like to hear?
I wanted to know if you had any comment. I'm going to ask Regent Parker also.
Let Parker go first, if you
No,
would.
I'll pass. Okay. All right. Regent Tuber, you're passing to?
Well, I understand that what we're intending to do is move this motion forward for the regents to consider. Is that what you're seeking? Some.
Well, that's what the administration. That's why they brought it to us. Yes, this is yeah.
Is that the intent, though, that you would presume to entertain the motion for this, or is that not what you're?
No. This is, we have no, this is like a work session. This is not a meeting with action.
Yeah, understood. Well, I think a couple of then, without respect to the proposed motion or the one that's drafted in before us, I would say that it's certainly been an interesting month, right? We've gone from some. But we've seen some extraordinary issues confront us as regents, as has the university across the board in faculty and administration. And so, I was intrigued by and I appreciate Regent Perdue's comments with respect to the consortium model because, as many of you know, I work in a consortium and have worked in a consortium for a couple of decades where organizations that have a lot of autonomy, in fact, absolute autonomy, are required to collaborate in order to make a system work that's otherwise untenable or would be virtually impossible to see healthcare administered in an environment where all of the challenges of geography and communications and transportation and costs have to be factored. So I was intrigued by the term consortium that the chancellors at the last meeting had proposed, and I don't feel like I was ultimately satisfied with hearing about what the opportunities might be in fleshing out what was being articulated at that point, partially because, I think we lacked time and we were under the constraints of extraordinary pressure at that time. And so I look forward to hearing more about that. I think that, as Regent Perdue has described, that there are, infinite opportunities and options in front of us, not just one or the other. We're not looking at simply one option versus another, because we're actually, we have a blank canvas before us at this point, recognizing a substantial cut is before us. So I look forward to the September meeting, but I am also curious a little bit about this, Chair Hughes, is the framework that we're operating from within one that's predicated on the motion that you made for the resolution that was passed at that meeting, and does that give us really a pathway towards consideration of the term that was previously articulated in President Johnson's 4 points was the configuration to be not considered by the Board of Regents, but approved by the Board of Regents. And I don't know if we've advanced that far. Have we advanced so far that we're merely being presented with a proposal to approve, or are we still in the consideration phase?
I'm
putting you on the spot.
No,
because you're
Regent, too, other people have put me on the spot before, so I know how to do this.
To you.
This circumstance that we're in right now, the president has followed the motion that we passed in November 30th. But what we're there, this review, remember when we passed motion, we were in exigency. So this motion, if this is what the administration brings to us in September, allows these reviews to be done. But I think pending the outcome of those, it'll take you to a circumstance of, looking at the things that you mentioned and also Regent Perdue mentioned. I see that, and I don't know if my concern and my hesitation was, I don't know if that's within the guidelines of our committee or not, but I mean, that's what I see.
Right, thank you. So I guess I would conclude with this, that there was a compact that was developed, and it was, there were 2 signatories. I assumed that it was Chair Davies and the governor, about how the cuts would be applied and manifest themselves. And then we have so that would be one corner of the framework. The other corner, I suppose, or the other side of that would be the direction, and I'm talking merely and surely from the point of governance. The other would be the direction that came by way of the resolution that you had moved at the time that we convened our last meeting. And so those 2 guiding principles, I guess, where is the latitude that exists for this committee or for the Board of Regents to consider among all of the options? Do all of the options exist between those 2 documents, or are there options that exist beyond that?
I think that when the document, the motion was done when we were in exigency. We're no longer in exigency. The president has suggested a motion that is a review of different programs.
Right.
So I guess I think that we're in a spot that we have to, the board has to go forward with something that is financially viable given our FY20 budget. I think that, I mean, from the big space, that's what, I mean, we are not in a circumstance we can't have something not financially viable.
Understood. So I didn't mean to misrepresent that was my last comment, because now I'll make my last comment, which is that so the motion, President Johnson, that is before us describes our reviews to be expedited, and I suppose that the circumstances that confront us would require some expeditious efforts to be made. But I think that because not just because we've been hearing from folks within the university, and certainly folks from beyond the university or alum or whatnot. Everybody in the state has some vesting in this university, and so to describe it, and I know that this wasn't intended to be in a irresponsive way, but as an expedited review, I think that being deliberate and being meticulous and being inclusive in terms of those reviews, because there are so many stakeholders within the state that we would want to make sure that we're giving due deference to those that would want to apply. And I think, as perhaps Regent Garrett had described before she left. So anyway, thank you, Regent Hughes, for your indulgence.
Thank you for your comments. Any other Regent comments? Hearing none. If there's Regent Anderson.
Sorry, Mary.
I like it when you talk, Regent Anderson.
In response to Regent Tuber's question, I think we have to be careful, because the board direction was for the president to prepare a plan for the board to transition to a single institutional accreditation. That directive is still on the table. It has not been rescinded. We rescinded the consistency, but we did not rescind this board direction for the president to move forward with that idea. In the board interest page, number 5, it says no matter which structural model we use, 3 accredited university or single accredited, then it gives the board interest. But the directive on the table that we approved was moving toward a single institution accreditation. So we'll have to deal with that one way or the other. I see that as the direction that the president should maintain.
Thank you, Regent Anderson. Regent Tuber?
Well, as long as you're calling on me, maybe I could implore the board secretary or board support, Brandy, to pull up the actual language. I don't recall it specifically as Regent Anderson had described.
In our packet.
Oh, thank you.
It's slide number 4, Andy.
Slide 4.
Right. Preparing a plan for board approval, right? And so, so maybe a plan for board approval would at least suggest that the board may not approve something, right?
Mm-hmm. Any other Regent comment? If there's no objection, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you all, and thank you, Mr. Preston, and your staff.
Thank you, team.
Thank you, UAF and UAF.
Thank you.
That's what I was asking for.
Yeah, so we will define what we mean by silence, what we mean by, what was off the list, was on the original list, but was submitted.
Mike